comrades present here today. Deyas Gabanye attend these meetings and never pass the message to anybody else. So it gives me a pleasure to invite the President of the ANC, if he may, give us a message from the Freedom Charter. And we celebrate 70 years. Niyakumbula mos, ubakani celebrate 70 years of Freedom Charter, ni celebrate and 70 years yam.
Amandla! Amandla! Forward with the Freedom Charter, forward. Forward with the African National Congress, forward. Forward with COSAS, forward. Forward with SASCO, forward. I did not mention those two when we opened, so I thought I should mention them. Comrades, the leadership of our movement, both at national level, the national officials, members of the National Executive Committee, provincial chairs, provincial committees, regional committees, and branch delegates who are here today. I also want to greet Isitwalandwe, Comrade Sophie de Brain, who has been with us in this NGC throughout. We extend our greetings to her. I did not see the others, but as I walked in, I saw Comrade Sophie. I also, as I did when we opened, greet the leadership of our leagues and the various leadership of other alliance organizations that are here present, COSATU, the SACP, and SANCO. Comrades, we gather as we do as members of the African National Congress and guests to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter. We gather here to recall the momentous events that took place at the Congress of the People in Kliptown on the 26th of June, 1955. We did get an explanation why we could not celebrate it at the time in June. There were just too many other things happening. And leading up to the G20, we thought that we should do it during the NGC. As it turns out, it was a good decision because all of us are here representing the various branches of our movement. Today, 70 years later, we celebrate this document, not as a historical artifact, but as an enduring vision of a free and democratic society that continues to inspire and guide our struggle. It was the late President O.R. Tambo who said, "The Freedom Charter was not just another political document. The Congress of the People was not just another conference. We firstly seek to build a united, capable, and ethical developmental state based on the will of the people, regardless of race, sex, it should be gender, belief, language, ethnicity, or geography, incorporating representative participation and deliberative elements so that the people shall govern, a key element or aspiration articulated in the Freedom Charter. Secondly, to achieve the National Democratic Society, we need to improve the quality of life for all through access to affordable, basic quality services, equal rights, and human dignity, and the broad opportunities for every citizen. Thirdly, to build an inclusive, transformed, and thriving economy that offers decent livelihoods to all, including restoring the rights of all South Africans to access land, the nation's wealth, finance, and other resources within a growing, integrated African continental economy. And fourthly, to build a nation with a common identity as an African country underpinned by non-racialism, non-sexism, unity, diversity, and a spirit of global human solidarity. The Freedom Charter is therefore the foundation of the South African society that we have solemnly undertaken to build. The Congress of the People was the culmination of centuries of resistance and decades of struggle. In order to resolve the problem of colonialism and later apartheid, the leaders of the Congress movement, as it emerged, always sought to come up with strategic solutions reflected in seminal documents that would unite the Congress movement, that would express our people's needs and aspirations, that would present a principled alternative to colonialism and apartheid with a view to guide future action and inspire the oppressed masses to continue fighting for freedom and justice. That was the wisdom of our leaders from time immemorial. As the Union of South Africa was established in 1910, to the exclusion of the majority of our people, African leaders came together from across the country to form the South African Native National Congress. In 1923, this organization, now known as the ANC, produced the first iconic document called the Bill of Rights in South Africa's history. As the Second World War raged and the African Atlantic Charter, which was adopted by the Allies who were fighting in the Second World War, as it appeared to point the way to a new world order, the wise leaders of the African National Congress produced a document called the African Claims. In 1954, the Federation of South African Women drafted and adopted the Women's Charter, which outlined for the first time demands for the recognition of women's rights, including equality, full political participation, and social economic justice for women across South Africa, regardless of race. And this was before they went to Beijing. This was a landmark document that laid the foundation for future women's activism and played a significant role in the anti-apartheid and women's rights movements. It was regarded as the first comprehensive women's rights document drafted in South Africa. Then the Freedom Charter was adopted in 1955. And it was to follow in the wake of all these iconic documents as one of the most important political documents in our country's history. Now, besides the documents I have referred to, there is a host of key documents that collectively shaped the vision, the tactics, and the ultimate achievement of freedom, equality, and justice in the struggle that started more formally in 1912. Remembering, of course, that our forebears had waged many other struggles way before. As the colonialists came, our forebears waged various struggles against them, including wars. In the Eastern Cape, for instance, there were wars that went on for 100 years. 9 wars, and in various parts of our country, there were wars and battles. But it was in 1912 when our glorious movement, the ANC, was formed to take the struggle forward against colonialism and later apartheid. And I'd like to enumerate these documents because we should know them and remember them. In some museum, these documents must all be laid out. At the very least, there are 14 key and iconic documents. Obviously, there are many more. But the ones that stand out, in 1923, as I referred to, was the Bill of Rights, which demanded land rights, equality, justice, representation, and freedom for all South Africans. Then the African Claims, which I've referred to, came in 1943, which was an early demand for civil and political rights. But political rights had been demanded even way before. Then there was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which, as we all know, was adopted elsewhere in the world globally. But it was affirmed by South Africa's liberation movements as a document that also advocated for the acquisition of rights for the people of South Africa. Then, in 1949, the leadership of the ANC Youth League came up with the idea of a program of action which was adopted, calling for militant action for liberation. Then in 1954, as I said, the Women's Charter, which called for equal rights for women, was adopted. Then followed the Freedom Charter. Then there was also another iconic document, which was the statement from the dock by President Nelson Mandela in the Rivonia trial in 1964, which set out ideas of resistance and equality. Then in the 70s, we had the Black Consciousness Movement. They adopted a number of manifestos in the 70s advocating for psychological liberation and black pride. Then in 1976, there was the students' uprising, but it was backed up by a number of resolutions that the young students adopted, which demanded education reform and, more importantly, youth rights. So we've had the women's rights, then the youth rights, and of course political rights that were articulated in various documents. Then in the 80s, we had the UDF founding charter of 1983, which launched the mass democratic movement for equality and mobilized our people whilst the ANC was banned. Then in 1989, we had the Harare Declaration, which was adopted by the Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the African Union. It outlined the principles and preconditions for negotiations to bring an end to apartheid. It became a key policy roadmap for international community and the liberation movement. Then the African National Congress itself, noticing that negotiations were now going to have to take place, decided proactively to draft the constitutional principles, which were adopted in 1991 and a policy conference also, as I recall, 1992. And these principles strongly influenced the negotiation processes at CODESA and at the multi-party negotiating forum, and the content of South Africa's interim constitution in 1993, as well as the final constitution adopted in 1996. Now, the constitutional principles which were adopted then had obviously been inspired to be drafted and adopted by President O.R. Tambo and the National Executive Committee while still in exile. And you could say that those principles became our Bible as we went into negotiations. Then there was the interim constitution of the Republic of South Africa in 1993, which contained the constitutional principles, but also called for the establishment of the Constitutional Assembly, which would draft the final constitution. And in the end, we have the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa of 1996, which created finally the democratic state that we now have today, with the legal guarantees of equality and justice. Tonight, comrades, we focus on the Freedom Charter, a document which stands above all these other documents. The Freedom Charter laid out a vision for a non-racial, democratic, and just South Africa. It became a moral and ideological foundation for the anti-apartheid struggle and later influenced our country's constitution. The idea to have the Freedom Charter to be drafted was initiated by Professor Z.K. Matthews, who proposed that a Congress of the People should be convened to draw up a Freedom Charter. It was in the town of Craddock in the Eastern Cape, at a provincial conference of the ANC in 1953, that he raised concern about the deepening crisis in race relations in South Africa. He said, "I wonder whether the time has not come for the ANC to consider the question of convening a national convention, a Congress of the People, representing all the people of this country, irrespective of race or color, to draw up a Freedom Charter for the democratic South Africa of the future. Close quotes. The drafting of the charter was principally led by the South African Congress Alliance, which included the ANC, the South African Indian Congress, the Congress of Democrats, and the Colored People's Congress. The Congress Alliance called on all South Africans to speak of freedom. It called on them to draw up their demands for the things that will make us free. In the call to the Congress of the People, the Congress Alliance said, almost poetically, let us speak of freedom, all of us together, African and European, Indian and colored, voter and voteless, privileged and rightless, the happy and the homeless, all the people of South Africa, of the towns and the countryside. Let us speak together of freedom and of the happiness that can come to men and women if they live in a land that is free. The report of the ANC NEC to the 1954 annual conference said, never in South African history have the ordinary people of this country been enabled to take part in deciding their own fate and future. There is a need to hear the voice of the ordinary citizens of this land, proclaiming to the world their demands for freedom. Close quotes. From across the country, people responded in their great numbers, leading to the Congress of the People, which was the biggest single gathering of representatives of the people of South Africa. Now, to have the Freedom Charter drafted, the ANC itself sent 50,000 volunteers across the country to collect freedom demands from ordinary people, a massive grassroots democratic exercise. Now, it is recorded that many of the demands were written on pieces of paper, some even on toilet paper, some on cardboard. But the 50,000 volunteers went out to mobilize the people. At that time, the population of South Africa in 1955 was between 14 to 16 million. They had done a census, I think in 1951, and another one was to follow. So the estimates are that the population would have been 14 million. Now, if the 50,000 volunteers had gone out to touch the hand, the soul, the mind of everyone, each one would have had to meet and talk to 280 people. Now, the organizational ability of amassing 50,000 volunteers showed that the ANC of the 50s had broad-based mass support and that it was able to mobilize grassroots structures throughout the country. Even then, the ANC showed that it was an organization that relied heavily on strong participatory grassroots structures. And these structures gave the organization widespread reach, ensured democratic participation, facilitated community engagement, and enhanced mobilization and effective feedback as well. Now, we often talk about being able to mobilize thousands of volunteers for election work. Are there any lessons that we as the African National Congress can draw from the manner in which the ANC of the 1950s functioned in? The ANC's success in mobilizing thousands of people stemmed from a combination of its historical legitimacy, the strong local branches that it had, strategic partnerships that it formed with a variety of organizations and a variety of sectors, from religious to sports to culture, you name it. The ANC was able to network with all those, unions and what have you. And it was able also to embark on dynamic mass campaigns. And there was ongoing political education, which often took place at night in what were called night schools. And attention was also given to community needs. The ANC volunteers and leaders were able at the time to organize various manifestations. And some of those did not even need meetings. They just needed the network of our volunteers then. It reminds me, as I digress, to how, for instance, where the national chairperson used to work at a company called Matla Coal, when the national executive of the NUM would have taken a decision for a strike, they would go back, and he used to be a shaft steward. He was right low at the bottom. And they would go back and not even hold meetings. They would use the M plan, through which had been conceptualized by Comrade President Nelson Mandela, through which you just communicate whatever has been decided on a one-to-one basis. Then those then go and communicate to their cells or their groups. And where he used to work, and he reports that they never held a meeting, and the 2,500 workers or so there, just the next day would be on strike. And the employers would be amazed that when was this planned? And it was this volunteer experience that the ANC used to work through as well. Now, these factors fostered active grassroots participation and deep community engagement, making the ANC of the 1950s a truly mass-based political movement in South Africa. Now, I always boast that we are the only organization that has a carpet type of network. Wherever you go in South Africa, you'll find an ANC branch, whether they like it or not. Now, this moment of memorializing the Freedom Charter, we also need to memorialize and draw inspiration to how our organization worked in the 50s when apartheid brutality was getting up to a high crescendo after the nationalists had won their election in 1948, and apartheid then started more formally and more brutally. They were able to organize even then. We have to ask ourselves whether we are able to continue with this rich legacy that the ANC had in the 50s. At the time of the Freedom Charter was drafted, apartheid was tightening its grip. The Freedom Charter boldly rejected racial hierarchy and demanded a society built on equality, democracy, and human rights. And you may recall that was a time when the Nationalist Party was propagating this fallacy about the swart gevaar, the fear of black people, deceiving white people in our country that black people wanted to drive them to the sea. Now, the apartheid government then saw the drafting or the adoption of the Freedom Charter as treasonous. It embarked on dawn raids across the country on the 5th of December 1956. They arrested leaders of our movement and put them finally on trial for treason. In Kliptown itself, they surrounded the gathering venue, raided the meeting, confiscated documents, photographed delegates, intimidated them. These actions were not random intimidation. They were also collecting material to criminalize the Freedom Charter and its authors. The 156 people from all races, both men and women, were arrested, and these are people whose only crime was to strive for a united, free, and equal country. The charge was based, that was sort of put against them, or to them, was based on the Freedom Charter adopted at the Congress of the People. The state claimed that the Freedom Charter was a blueprint for overthrowing the government. The Congress of the People was portrayed as the first step in a revolutionary conspiracy, and thus the intimidation at Kliptown was directly tied to building the case that they wanted to put against the 156 leaders who were arrested. By March of 1961, which is the length of the trial that took place from 56 to 1961, you will recall that Comrade Nelson Mandela was a lawyer, and he had to keep on going to practice law but be on trial. And you may remember the pictures that appeared with many of our people going to the trial and observing what was happening. By 1961, all of them had been acquitted and discharged. Now, looking back, we see that the Freedom Charter campaign had a profound impact or effect on the Congress movement and its organizational structures and capability. It cemented the non-racial character of the movement, both in terms of its content and its composition. It enabled the Congress movement to expand its organizational reach beyond the urban areas, transforming it into a fully fledged national movement. As Comrade Ishmael Vardy says or notes in his 1995 history of the Freedom Charter campaign, and he says, the campaign for the Congress of the People and the Freedom Charter introduced within the liberation movement a degree of ideological uniformity and cohesion that did not exist previously. The Freedom Charter provided a clear and concise set of policies, aims and objectives, as well as principles. Now, the Freedom Charter set out a 10-clause vision for a democratic, equal South Africa. Now, having been drafted through mass public consultation, where 3,000 people had come together, and having adopted this document at the Congress of the People, it was a document that was later to be used as a mobilizing, organizing weapon in the struggle for democracy. It was adopted by many organizations across the country, and there seemed to be competition, even in the 80s, and it was a defiance against apartheid. And I remember very clearly in the union movement, it was union after union adopting the Freedom Charter and COSATU, demonstrating that we are not afraid. You may have charged our leaders in 1956, but we, the inheritors of this movement and this struggle, we are not afraid. And it was so impactful. I remember, and I digress for a minute, when I was General Secretary of the NUM, whenever we had to employ even organizers, we would not really focus on their ability to organize. The first question we would ask, what is your name? Where do you come from? Do you know the Freedom Charter? Can you give us clauses of the Freedom Charter? And if you didn't know the Freedom Charter, you didn't get a job. Now, Comrade Mantashe was lucky. He just escaped because he became an organizer in the NUM. He just scraped through and was able to tell us a few clauses of the Freedom Charter. And I want... Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter later influenced the values, as I said earlier, that are embedded in our democratic Constitution of 1996. Comrades, that Constitution has used the Freedom Charter as its foundation, as it should have. It called for a fundamental restructuring of all aspects of South African society. Among the most profound assertions to come out of the Congress of the People was that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. That statement was far more than an assertion of the right of residents in this country. It was more of an assertion of a common citizenship. It was a declaration that all South Africans, regardless of race, have a right to an equal share of the country's existence. They must share in the ownership of and access to the means of production. They must live a fair life, an equal life, and must have a fair share of the national income and public resources. The Freedom Charter called for the dispossessed and the disenfranchised to have equal ownership of their country. At the same time, it also made clear that white South Africans, the descendants of those who had come as colonizers and settlers, also had an equal right to call this country their home. This principle has guided the African National Congress over many decades and is foundational to the democratic society we are building. The Freedom Charter declares that the people shall govern. And as South Africans, we must be proud that for the last 3 decades, we have consistently held free and fair elections, and that these elections continue to reflect the will of the people. And this is not our declaration only. It is what even those from outside our country observe. When they come to observe our elections, they say our elections have reflected the will of the people. That was a clear aspiration that was set out in the Freedom Charter. Democracy is deeply entrenched in our society and amongst our people. We understand that democracy also is much more than just holding regular elections. We should actively encourage citizens to be involved in community building, in civic duties, in civil society, and in local campaigns. We should also continue to say that as citizens, we all have a responsibility. One of those responsibilities is to participate in voting. One of those responsibilities is to express our views. Now, we have set up a parliamentary process or system that even before our laws are passed, there needs to be community engagement where our people will also express themselves, so that it is not only those that have been elevated to the National Assembly and to the Council of Provinces who make laws without the people being heard. That is the true substance of our democracy. And comrades, this is something we should hold very dear. But it is also something that has been passed on to us by our forebears when they drafted the variety of documents, 14 documents that I've referred to. All of them, bar none, were drafted on a collective basis through thoroughgoing discussions, engagements, and deliberations. And that is the culture, and that is the tradition that we have as the people of South Africa. But it is this tradition that is deeply embedded in us as the African National Congress, as the members of the ANC. And this is where we get and draw our responsibility to be leaders of society from. Because over the years, the ANC has played a critical role in many of the documents that have defined the country that we are: collective action, deliberation, and engagement. So an active citizenry is vital for our democracy to flourish and for our country to succeed. The Freedom Charter envisages a developmental state that plays a leading role in ensuring social and economic opportunities to those previously denied. It envisages a state with sufficient legal authority and means to ensure decent working conditions and to take steps to improve the lives of the poor, the working class, and the marginalized. It envisages local councils where citizens must be consulted about development needs of their communities and actively involved in the implementation of developmental programs. The Freedom Charter says that all national groups shall have equal rights. The task of building a non-racial society remains fundamental to the work of our movement and to broader society. Now, through our policies, through our programs, and our practices, we need to advance non-racialism, ensuring that every South African appreciates their equal and irrevocable right to call this country home. And all South Africans must feel that they have a future here. But more importantly, we must do it as the African National Congress. Our structures, our programs must be representative of the non-racial character that we have embraced, the principles of equality of all national groups. It is vital that the ANC should live this principle. And we also need to build a non-sexist society, as set out in our charter, in which all forms of gender discrimination, oppression, exploitation, and violence are eradicated. This requires the achievement of full gender equality in all areas of life, from the home to the workplace. This requires the eradication of patriarchy, where men feel that they are better than women. And it also requires that there should be equality even in the economy, also on the sports field. We must be disturbed. We must be disturbed whenever we see structures, programs, activity that is either inspired by our own movement or by the government that is not balanced on a gender basis. It must concern us. And this is so vital. This is so vital because the women of our country constitute the majority section of our population. We need to ensure that we have effective policies and programs to advance the empowerment of women. Ndicela amanzi. Now, comrades, having recognized that gender-based violence and femicide is a national disaster, we need, as the African National Congress, to mobilize all the energy and all the resources of society to end gender-based violence. Now, a united and cohesive society requires also that we end exclusion, segregation, as well as marginalization experienced by persons with disabilities. Now, I say this advisedly because the core message of the Freedom Charter is about equality, equal treatment. The Freedom Charter calls on us to live this principle of equality. We need to confront discrimination, prejudice, and violence directed against members of the LGBTIQ+ community. Now, we need to do this to give real effect to the right to equality, not only contained in the Freedom Charter, but in our Constitution as well. The Freedom Charter declares that the people shall share in the country's wealth, and there shall be work and security. As we cement the political gains of the last 3 decades, our focus is firmly on the task of fundamental economic transformation. Now, at this NGC, that is what tomorrow we should also, through that commission that deals with the matter, focus on that. But the issue of fundamental economic transformation should run right across all the 16 commissions that we have. As a movement, we have resolved that rapid inclusive growth is necessary to generate employment and business opportunities and is essential to advance empowerment and redress of the imbalances of the past. Since 1994, we have enacted laws to advance the transformation of our economy. We have anchored broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act and the Employment Equity Act. The progress we have made is undeniable. National Chairperson was giving his own mini address here when we started. As he was saying, we need to be alive and aware of the progress that has been made. For the progress that has been made to realize the aspirations that were articulated in the Freedom Charter is quite phenomenal. And those who say the Freedom Charter has not been implemented are lying, because the Freedom Charter is a living document. The Freedom Charter, as our forebears said, we will implement all these aspirations throughout our lives, working and struggling side by side together. And that is what we are doing now. So the progress we have made is undeniable, but needs to increase. We have seen real changes in ownership patterns. We've created a middle class, something that was unheard of. Many of our people have now been able to live a better life than they did before, but we want them to live even a much better life. That's what we are struggling for. We have seen changes in management, in enterprise development, and in skills development. And despite this progress, the average income of white households is still nearly 5 times higher than that of black African households. This is what the implementation of the Freedom Charter is aimed at achieving. That is why we need to intensify our drive for inclusive growth through infrastructure development, industrial policy, land redistribution, as well, whether they like it or not, black economic empowerment. Now, we do not agree with the suggestion that we must make a choice between growth and transformation. Economic growth without transformation entrenches exclusion, and transformation without growth is unsustainable. So the two must go together. Now, to build a country in which there is work and security, as articulated in the Freedom Charter, where all may share in its wealth, we must pursue growth and transformation throughout. Now, when it comes to work, it also talked about a minimum wage in one of its subtexts. And here, having adopted the Freedom Charter, we must say that we are pleased to have an ally like COSATU that organizes employed workers, that felt that there are many other workers who are not remunerated well, and urged us as the African National Congress to take up the struggle for a national minimum wage, as articulated in the Freedom Charter. And we have done that. We now have a national minimum wage. And we must applaud COSATU and say thank you to our ally. We may disagree on some issues, but on this one, we agreed. But as we were campaigning for the national minimum wage, and because we were starting at a low level and did not want to lose many jobs, COSATU leaders kept saying, UDP, I was DP then, they said, UDP, talk about it. We in COSATU will stand behind you. They didn't talk much, but they initiated it. The Freedom Charter says the land shall be shared among those who work it. The struggle to return land, the land of this country, to all the people of South Africa remains a historical and economic imperative. More than a century after its enactment, the Natives Land Act continues to define much of the landscape of our country. It is to address this persistent injustice that we are proceeding with the implementation of the Accelerated Land Reform Program to provide land to those who work it and who need it, including young people and women. Now, at government level, we are going to seek to take this to a higher level. Government level, we are going to seek to take this to a higher level. Government level, we are going to seek to take this to a higher level. Government level, we are going to seek to